welcome. We'll open the meeting with our Karakia. Thank you, Julian.
Kia. Orena koutou Karakia timitanga. E oha ki runga ki a Ranganui, e oha ki raro ki a Papatūnuku. Turakina ngā mea kino ki te pai a tea, ui hia mai o korowai a aroha. Hei tanga ma mātau ki puta ki te whai ao, ki te ao marama, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. I acknowledge, greet those things above, the sky, the universe and the heavens. I acknowledge and greet those things below, the earth in all its entirety. Cast all negativity to the distant horizon and cover us with a cloak of affection and love as a treasure bestowed upon us. So we may enter into enlightenment, let it be bound and fixed. Yes, fixed. Let it be agreed by all. Kia ora tātou.
Amen. Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you, Julian. Can you hear us, Glenda? No? All right, shall we sing our Waiata? I'm going to let Charlotte lead us today. Would you like to stand?
And Diane's here as well.
Te awa tupua, mai te kahui mana ki tāna roa, ka wakapirina mai kona piringa, hinenga oko, tama upoko, tupo o te kie, ko te awa ko, ko te awa ko, e re te awa tupua. Beautiful. You're wonderful. My goodness. Oh. Yeah. Didn't sound rough, Charlotte. Glenda, can you hear us yet? I'll just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to ring Glenda and we'll do it that way until see if it works. Until we get the technology right.
Can't see or hear anything.
Oh, okay. So they're working on it. Scott's working on it. Oh.
Yeah, the camp. Okay, but I should be able to hear. I thought.
I've got you on speaker, so be careful what you say.
Cool.
Do you want to we'll leave this going so you can at least hear the meeting? And do you want to put yourself on mute?
That'll be fantastic.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. Good morning, Rob. What apologies have we got? I've got one apology from Jenny. If the meeting's not finished by 11:30, Jenny needs to leave. Are there any other apologies? No? So I propose that we accept that apology from Jenny. Anything from Philippa? No, she may be here yet. So we'll put that apology. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Josh. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Any declarations of interest in relation to items of business this morning? Josh?
Yeah, it's not a conflict, but just want to highlight that I chair the Board of Age Concern, which has the wellbeing contract for the pensioner housing portfolio.
Okay, thanks for reminding us of that. We'll move on then to the minutes of our last meeting of the 16th of May. Has everybody had the opportunity to read those minutes? And are we in a position where we can move them as a correct record of the meeting? Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Peter. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Excuse me, Kate.
Yes?
just a heads up, but we just had some additional information come in at a late stage for the government consultation update. Do you mind if we move a motion just to accept that late information, Diane's just doing a motion now?
Okay, so we've got the draft Three Waters submission, but nobody's had a chance to read it. What is the actual status of late items? If it's tabled in the discussion, should it be a late item?
It's not a late item, it's additional information.
Additional information.
Yes, for the government, it's part of the, should have been clear, it's part of the government consultation update.
Okay. So we'll put the motion that
Give us a second, we'll just write it out.
that we will receive additional information. Water Services Entities Amendment, draft submission. Would someone like to move that?
Would we have some time during this meeting to have go skim over it at all? It just seems
Yeah, we'll just see how it rolls. Wait till we get to the item, and if we need to kind of take a pause and digest the info, depending on what we want to do with it, really.
okay, fine.
So we'll certainly take that time. As additional information to the government consultation update. Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks, Andrew. Any discussion? Rob, you're looking perplexed? Or is that just your early morning before coffee look? Sorry? Oh, okay. So you're not perplexed? No, all good. All right, no further discussion. All those in favour of accepting that additional information, please say aye. Against, carried. All right, item 5.1, draft procurement policy. Mike, you're speaking to this item. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. From a review of the procurement policy which is undertaken each triennium, we officers are recommending three main changes. I've listed them there: the removal of the tenders board, the weighting given to broader outcomes, and increasing a dollar threshold for when procurement methodology is to be approved. Those later two recommendations are in the report. I'll take that as read. I just want to make a few comments on the first one, which is the removal of the tenders board, which is probably the more meaty one. I've got in the report here that these were discussed at the Risk and Assurance Committee, who approved or approved these recommendations. For removing the tenders board, they approved it on the understanding that the role of the tenders board, being mainly that of probity, can be achieved in the absence of the tenders board. And I've got some commentary on that in the item. I will note that this report before this committee I have shared with the chair of the Risk and Assurance Committee, so they're aware of the comments I've made on that committee. Just before I make a couple of comments on the tenders board, I do want to acknowledge the elected members here who have previously sat on the tenders board, Councillors Jenny and Councillors Rob. They, along with senior officers, have put a lot of time and effort into their role on the tenders board. From an officer perspective, the tenders board is very admin heavy, which is not in itself a reason for removing it, but it is a reason to look at if the role can be achieved in a more efficient manner, which we believe it can be. From the few councils we have contacted, 5, 6, 7 councils, none of them operated a tenders board. They received assurance of probity through other means. So as I said, the report here outlines a number of ways that elected members can have assurance that the key role of the Tenders Board, which is probity, can be achieved in the absence of the Tenders Board. For example, by the use of an independent probity resource, which has worked particularly well with the current tender for the curbside services, including the procurement on the internal audit program, which we will do, reporting to the Operations and Performance Committee on commitments entered into, including procurement methodology. An example I've got attached to this item on a sample report, and so on. I have made comments here, I think reasonably important to understand, of the we've got a dilution of accountability when elected members sit on a process that they've already approved for the Chief Executive to go ahead. So for example, what I mean by that is the Council provides delegation to the Chief Executive to get on and do a work program within a budget constraints. And then the Tenders Board involves elected members sitting in on that process and making recommendations to the Chief Executive of how they should carry out their work program, in a sense. So there's a bit of a mixed messages there. I think in my mind probably the most important consideration here is contractors, that they have confidence in the tenders process, which can be very complex, that they have confidence that there is no political or officer bias or interference in the process, and that those who involved in the procurement, making decisions and recommendations, actually have the skills of procurement and contract management to be able to make those recommendations to the Chief Executive. So those are some of the key points in the report. I'm happy to take questions on the report.
Thank you, Mike. Questions? Who's reaching for their buzzer? Councillor Vincent.
Who was the last one?
I was the last.
So you, sorry. You're next.
Are you going to give me the first?
No, I think Councillor Jenny needs to go first.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
My primary question is cost. I'm very cost conscious at the moment, and at the moment the Tenders Board may not be as ideal as we would like, but there is no additional necessary cost. What is going to be the additional cost of having to bring in an independent person for all of these? And also, where there is a delegated level as well, I mean, is it going to be for all tenders over that delegation, or just for some? How's that going to work?
Okay,
To bring in that independent person.
I'll respond to the second comment first. So this, under the current policy, tenders over 200,000 needs to go to the Tenders Board first to get approval of the tender methodology. That limit was put in place 10 or so years ago. We're recommending that increases to $300,000 to take into account of inflation. So what would normally happen if that happens is that the contract manager will put together a procurement plan, and that procurement plan or tender methodology would be approved by the general manager prior to going out to tender. Anything over 300,000, between 300,000 and $3.5 million, the tender methodology would need to be approved by the Chief Executive, and over $3.5 million, we're keeping that as it is. That methodology needs to come through to Council to get approval for the tender methodology prior to going out to tender. So we're only increasing one of those limits. As far as the cost goes, I would disagree that there is no cost of the Tenders Board. From the tenders board, we have obviously elected members and we have senior officers sitting on there. And there's considerable time senior officers have to take to read reports and understand that. On top of that, we're about to employ as you're aware, a senior procurement officer has left for other opportunities, and we are replacing that with a strategic procurement lead. In my mind, they've got quite a large work program in front of them to provide efficiencies and improvement in processes. If they, from my experience with the previous senior procurement officers, they spent quite a lot of time on the tenders board, reviewing documentation, all that stuff, prior to come tenders board and post tenders board. My preference for the new strategic procurement lead is that they are doing value-added work and looking at improving our processes as opposed to that admin work for the tenders board. So I do believe there's quite a large opportunity cost of operating a tenders board. I would think for those procurements that are high value, high sensitive, or could lead to has the potential to lead to legal action if it's not done correctly, I would prefer to use an independent procurement resource even if a tenders board is operational, simply because there is that perceived perception by outside parties that when you have elected members and officers making that type of recommendation, there is a potential bias in that. So as I said, for things like the curbside, and then I think using an independent property resource is absolutely a good choice, even if the tenders board is operational.
A follow-up, Jenny?
Only insofar as, so what do you think the additional cost will be? Because as you've quite rightly said, there's a lot of sunk cost. So if people weren't working on tenders, they would be working on something else. There'd be no additional cost. They would just change their work programs. So what would be and we know that. So what would be the additional cost to the community and how often would these people be brought in? Are we only talking about the really, really big projects, so therefore they would not be used very often?
Absolutely, you're correct there, yes. Yes.
Do you want to add something?
Through you, Madam Chair, just to add to that conversation, correct, I think it would be the exception, not the norm, to be using the independent probity auditor, and part of the reason for that is being scalable and proportionate to the level of risk. So certainly anything over the $3.5 million would be for consideration for an independent probity auditor, but our longer term high value maintenance contracts like the curbside collection is a good case in point. When our roading alliance comes to the end of its term, that one would be a biggie, that would be an obvious candidate for an independent probity auditor, but it is those kind of contracts that you'd be targeting with the independent probity auditor and then scaling down for the more minor stuff, just to keep the cost proportionate as well as the level of effort.
Thank you. Rob, then
Yeah,
Charlotte, then
Thank
Peter.
you. First thing I'd like to say is, for those who don't understand, that the tenders board was quite a time-consuming committee to be on, as Jenny knows. That there was a standing appointment every Friday, and that then papers would come out on a Wednesday and it would be done online unless a member wanted to request a in-person meeting. And I would guess that at least 50% of the weeks of the year there are items to go before the tenders board. So it's not inconsiderate. Now, Mike, what I want to know is, the tenders board was made up of the officers that presented the item, who were responsible for putting the report together, which they would have to put together no matter how it was decided, whatever you called the decision-making team that approved it. Then there was your finance team, and then there was the three electorate representatives. Now, who's going to make this decision now? If there aren't any elected representatives, if there aren't any finance team, like you have said there is a lot of work involved for you guys, is it just going to be the officers themselves that are going to make this decision? I just can't see how this probity is coming forward. It's all very well to talk about hiring someone in, but that wouldn't be warranted on more than probably 10% of those contracts that are let. So I just can't see how this works. You can make this sound very onerous by calling it a tenders board. Sounds,
Rob, you're wandering into comment.
Yeah,
so
I know, but
your
it's...
question is...
Yeah, well, I've just asked Mike how this probity is going to come forward. Who's going to be the decision maker?
So the decision on so probity is that there is a fair and transparent process. We also talk within that for value for money and things like that, which comes back to following our procurement policy, which is approved by elected members. And if we follow our procurement policy, that in effect is probity in itself. So we've got to make sure that tenders follow the policy, and part of that will be through the internal audit process, that things have followed a policy. We also need to ensure that we are having competitive tenders and things like that. So the decision on procurement methodology will be made by the contract manager, who has skills in contract management and understands tendering, which, as I said, can be a very complex project. And then if it's over $300,000 with the limit we're proposing, then the general manager themselves would have sign off of that tender methodology. Over 3.5 would come back through to council. So I guess the question with those things in place, what is the role of the tenders board if there's assurance that a procurement policy is being followed, if this committee can have assurance of that? Does that answer your question?
Well, it still doesn't tell me who's actually going to do this.
Rob, what I heard was the contract manager decides for certain size contracts, decides the procurement methodology or the procurement plan, and then there's a different process for those over 300k. Was that what you said?
Yes.
So that's your answer.
So over 300k, there's no other probity.
And I think just adding to that,
below
the
300k.
The process with the tenders board is that the contract manager decides the procurement methodology, decides that, it takes it through to the tenders board to basically agree to that and then make recommendation to chief executive. So the contract manager has always done the initial assessment of what's the appropriate tender methodology process.
Yeah. And the other question, Chair, Kate, is that what previously occurred was that every tender that came before the tenders board was reported through to council in an item. The item said the range of tenders, and it from the highest to the lowest, and it said the number of tenders, and it said who was awarded the tender and what it was. Now, is that still going to occur?
Can I answer that? So in this item there is a attachment which lists two commitments we've entered into. That report you've got here has slightly been modified to go to the Operations Committee, which includes the procurement methodology. So that will be coming through on the reports, procurement methodology, how many tenders there were, the budgets, what the outcome of that was, council's contingency item, and who was awarded the contract. So that will all be coming through to the Operations Committee, and the first report is coming to the committee next week with the commitments we've entered into, over $200,000 since October to now.
So that's on page 63, that example, Rob,
Thank you.
similar to what we've had in the past, and I think it addresses the things that you were asking about. We'll move on to your questions, Charlotte,
Thank you.
and come back to Rob if he needs to ask a follow-up.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, just I guess for clarity, is an intended outcome of this new procurement policy to have more robust understanding and proficiency, and I guess and efficiency, like throughout all of the staff and departments?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I've sat on the tenders board for 7-8 years, and one thing I've come to understand is that procurement and contract management is complex.
Yeah.
Would like, first of all, those who will be involved in procurement, contract management, right from their induction into council, to be able to sit with the strategic procurement lead to understand our processes. There are training courses, external training courses, and we would like to put our contract managers through that as part of the professional development. So absolutely need to ensure we have adequately skilled staff and ongoing training.
Right. You've pretty much answered my follow-up question, which is, will there be thorough procurement training throughout all departments and management? Thank you. I appreciate it, Mike.
Can I just make a point of clarification, please, Chair Kate? Perhaps it's not understood that the tenders board does not decide who is awarded the contract. That's decided by the officers, and there's a recommendation comes forward. So that's not the role of the tenders board to decide who gets it.
Thank you. Peter, then Charlie, then Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern is on the broader outcomes and the weighting of those. It says that we are using the minimum amount of weighting to that. Is there a reason because we're only going for the minimum, or can we raise it higher?
We can raise it higher if this committee wants to do that. When we started with the broader outcomes in the previous iteration, we had it in there but no weighting because we needed to that the contracting community come to terms of what this actually means. And I think there's still education to go in that space. And I think part of the role of the strategic procurement lead will be to discuss with the contracting community how this has actually achieved broader outcomes. So if it's appropriate, the contract manager can always increase those weightings, but that's just a minimum for when you have weighted attributes procurement methodology.
Okay, thank you. And then follow-up question to that then is, that was on page 16. On page 17, the Maori and cultural considerations. And it says there that it's not necessary. Can you explain why that was not necessary? Because, to give you some context, I would have thought environmental, social, economic and cultural, if you looked through the lens of our Maori, that they would be very much concerned or interested in all four of those considerations.
Look, I think the whole community is interested in all of the four considerations, but this item is about changes to a policy on how we procure our goods and services. It's not actually us going and procuring a specific type of good or whatever. So generally, when for these policies, well, for this one here, we didn't consider it necessary from the outset to do that, considering we are following the central government guidelines in this as well. I'm not sure if that sort of answers your question.
It sort of does, and I'll leave my my view on it in the comments.
Yeah, we are, as I said, following the recommendations from central government. It's not mandated, but we are following the recommendations, what they think is best practice.
Okay.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. I was a bit originally concerned about the removal of the tenders board would give the contractors or the tenderers a bit of comfort that there's less control over their tenders, or they might feel like they can go open slather. But after what Rob said, the tenders board doesn't actually make that decision anyway. So how does that work if the tenders board doesn't make the decision, Mike?
Tenders board have never made it a decision. All tenders board is there to recommend to the chief executive to enter into contract or to council to approve the contract, because it considers the process has been fair and transparent. So the process will be fair and transparent without the tenders board, and I guess the item is outlining how elected members can have assurance that probity is achieved. As far as tenderers going open slaver on tenders, nobody wants that. One of the principles of good procurement and what's in the procurement policy is open tenders, so competitive tendering. So when we go out to tender, we ensure all relevant parties are aware of it and they have the opportunity to compete in the market. And I think it's important also not to underestimate the skill that contract managers do have in that.
So if the board, without the board being in place, there'd be no risk of, what am I trying to say, mates getting contracts when someone else should probably get it.
With the tenders board in place?
Without the tenders board?
No.
Is the tenders board not a filter for that?
No. The things such as the internal audit, things like that, will give assurance on that. There is, as I mentioned, that perceived risk of having elected members on the tenders board because of political bias, where mates will get contracts. I'm not saying it happens, but there is that perceived risk.
Michael?
Madam Chair, what is the delta cost between the current solution, the tenders board, and the new solution, including opportunity cost? And I'm understanding that this may not be available, but I'm happy to hear that it's cost neutral.
Can you answer that, Mike?
I don't have dollar figures for what the opportunity cost is for having a tenders board. I do make the point, as we all are aware here, that everybody is under the pump as far as work goes, and so improving efficiency in the way we do our processes benefits everybody, and then means in the end we don't need to employ extra resources to do work we actually can't get around to. My judgment is that the cost, if you costed up the opportunity cost of having a tenders board, it is more costly having a tenders board than not having a tenders board. One of the, and again, we're always looking for efficiencies in the procurement process. It's not just tenders board, it's also, I've mentioned there about having a software solution to our contract procurement processes. That's going to be one of the first things that the new strategic lead will look at, because the reporting that we give to elected members, I want it to be very robust and have all the information that you require. And that reporting will not only just be to elected members, also come through to the executive leadership team as well. So there'll be many eyes checking that we are actually have got a robust procurement process, giving value through to council and the ratepayer.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, what is the rationale other than inflation for the delegation increase from 200 to 300,000?
That's a recommendation we're taking again for efficiencies. We're not welded to that. If the committee decides it wants to remain at $200,000, it's not a huge amount of work. It just means attenders, rather than coming over the chief executive's desks from 200 to 300, given how busy he is, it will go to a general manager's desk to sign off.
Thank you.
And all of those tenders will come through in the report to the operations committee anyway. Jenny?
I was going to add to comments, but I kind of do have a question from what you've just said, Mike. And having 6 years, experience on the tenders board, put me in a position of knowing a lot more than most of the other people in the room. So I acknowledge that aspect. You've said that there are going to be a lot of eyes looking over this to make sure it's okay. You know, we put aside the tenders board. There are going to be a lot of eyes on it to make sure that it follows proper process and the best outcome happens. How are we, as councillors, or how the Risk and Audit Committee, going to know that that is actually the case? What mechanism would we have to be assured that proper process and all the ducks are in a row, all the documentation is tight? How are we going to know that? Because I can't see how there is any way for that information to filter through to us at all.
Yeah, I think one of the key components here, and I spoke to our risk manager last couple of weeks on this, is the internal audit function. So this is a change in our process. The internal auditor, and it will be externally sourced. It won't be a council officer doing this, it will be an external party doing internal audit, will have access to all of our records and all of our reporting to ensure that that we have done that.
So we currently have an internal auditor?
We don't at the moment.
Are we recruiting for one? Was that the plan? I mean, we were contracted out to the whatever that MW last. Then we've done it internally. Are we going back to contracting externally?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, if you recall during the annual plan discussions, we flagged with elected members that our staff member internal auditor had resigned, and that the intention was to go back to a contracted model because that could be delivered at a lower cost.
So I have a follow-up question to Jenny's probing, and that is, when might we expect to see the internal audit plan that will include something to do with the internal auditing of the probity and tendering process?
That will need to come through to the Risk and Assurance Committee. So at the moment, I've discussed with the risk manager actually yesterday what we believe is the appropriate internal audit program that will go past ELT and then go to the committee for their approval. I'm not sure whether that's in the September committee or the December, but we are recommending the procurement process is included in that program.
Okay, so September, that will include.
So I'm not sure the program of the committee just now, but it will be coming through to the committee.
And it includes a piece on procurement.
I'm recommending that internal audit as part of the 24-25 internal audit program.
24-25.
Well, sorry, 23-24. Sorry, I got my years wrong. 23-24 audit program.
Okay, thank you. Good answer. Rob.
Thank you.
Then Philippa.
One of the most important clauses in this document is the 16.2 buy local premium. And it's a very, very important one. And some of us have different views about what level this should be. Chair Kate, I would ask that this policy is not passed in its entirety without reviewing 16.2. This needs a focus on itself. The arguments put forward for a buy local premium, the merits of it, the public interest in it, needs some more reflection other than just getting to the end of this document and passing a procurement policy. And so that's the first thing I would ask the Chief Executive, or through yourself, if we could actually have another item come to Council to review the buy local premium.
Well, I'd suggested in the first instance you ask some questions about the buy local premium, and then if the meeting decides that they want to get to a place where that is a separate review or this policy comes back specifically for that item, then so be it. But in the first instance, ask some questions and we'll see what the answers are.
Okay. Well, perhaps explaining what the buy local premium is important.
Just a minute. Yeah, okay. So, Mike, do you want to explain to us what the buy local premium is, please?
So the buy local premium provides a small weighting advantage, 5%, to local contractors who bid.
Can I just correct that, please, Mike? It's 5% under $100,000, $5,000 over $100,000, and if so, it's of $1 million contract. It's $5,000 for a local premium.
And does not apply to all kinds of contracts.
No.
We're
That's
not in
right.
debate now, folks. I'm going to ask the Chief Executive just to step in here.
So, through you, Madam Chair, for your awareness, and it may help answer Councillor Vinson's query here, officers are planning a second, slightly more substantial review of the procurement policy. The intention of the review today was to make those minor amendments and deal with the matter of the tenders board early in the triennium. But as you know, we've had some workshops around how council can be better applying the broader outcomes and the supply chain leadership ethos, and how that can be used to drive added value through our procurement processes. That definitely would encompass the role of any kind of buy local premium, and we are planning to do that work over the next kind of 6 to 12 months and bring a further update back to the committee for your consideration. So hopefully that answers your question and gives you the assurance.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, David. Philippa.
Thank you. I think you moved us to page 63. So I'd just like to understand what's been suggested when a report now comes. So the with this if this procurement policy is passed, obviously there's the tenders board being removed, new process, reports that new process with a strategic procurement lead will put recommendations through to the Operations and Performance Committee, or decisions will be made and it will just report to. I'm just a bit confused.
So the decision making for entering into contracts will go through the normal process minus the tenders board. Contracts, major contracts, which is defined as over $3.5 million, will come through to council for approval of the tender methodology. And by approving tender methodology, you're then giving the chief executive financial delegation to enter into the contract once the tender process has been completed. So that will continue as normal, but this committee, the Operations and Performance Committee, they'll be reporting through to there of commitments or contracts council has entered into, which is what we had done prior to the elections. But it will be a slightly more detailed report than the one I have included here, to include such things as tender methodology, because I think it's important that elected members understand the methodology behind a procurement and how we can sort of add value through that.
Sorry, so Mike, just right, so page 63, I'm just, that's just an example, is it, of how previously it was reported, is that correct?
Yeah,
To us?
yeah, it's a truncated report. What was previously reported was similar to that.
Yeah.
There may be one or two fields missing, but what's going to the Operations and Performance Committee next week has a couple extra columns in there. One of them is the procurement methodology, and the other one is the budget that related to that piece of work, which I don't believe is in the report you have here.
Just remind me, pre this new process being decided on, this was just, the report that we got from the Tenders Board was just, the decisions were made, it was just for noting. Is that correct?
That's
and
right.
This is still similar?
Yes. Yes.
Decisions are made, reports for noting, but in tenders over 3.5 million or above, a separate report will come to council and will be a discussion around the procurement policy,
yes.
and then it will go back through this process, will it?
Yeah, which is similar to what's happening before. So $3.5 million, that's a threshold where elected members or the council approves the tender methodology. What I mean by that is it lowest price conforming, is it weighted attributes, that type of stuff. And then once you agree to the procurement plan, it then goes through the tender process and it comes back evaluated as per normal, which is by three staff members who declare conflicts of interest right up front, who have no conflicts of interest, declare that. And then the chief executive signs off the contract. That's the process. It has been, of course, the Tenders Board is in there, but the process going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Ross?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Possibly two questions, maybe one. I note page 18 is the risk profile is low, and then I note on page 56 that another council referred to about the buy local premium. So my first question would be, currently or into the future with this possible change, to what degree are local or non-local tenderers educated on these changes and internal processes? How transparent is it to a tenderer?
So our procurement policy is on our website. The Tenders Board is an internal process. We're not going to go out widely to the market, so we don't have a Tenders Board, but our policy on how we procure will be on our website and will be updated following decisions from today. The reason I've done the risk rating as low is because I believe this elected members can have assurance that our tenders will still can have assurance of probity with our tender process without the Tenders Board, and that's why I've had the risk rating as low.
So because it's on the website, the onus is pretty much on the tenderer to make themselves aware.
What's important for tenderers, what they need to understand is when a tender is going out there, they need to understand the tender methodology, what we're looking for in the tenders. That's all out there in the documentation we send. Part of the role of the new strategic risk, as I mentioned before, is particularly around broader outcomes. And there's a lot of value that can be added to the community for broader outcomes, but this is new to contract managers, and so we need to work with them and educate them on how that can be achieved, and that will be part of the role of the new strategic lead.
Thank you, and that accidentally led to my second question. Thanks for the segue. Bearing in mind the broader outcomes are going to come into play, and there's an internal audit and there's an external auditor system, then naturally whatever possibly unanswered questions or vagaries that some of us might have will be picked up at some point, and will be made aware of changes that may need to be made. Is that right?
Yeah, the internal audit process, the report will be presented to the Risk and Assurance Committee, and it's very important that there is independence between the auditor and officers in that. So you need to ensure that, have confidence that when the report comes through to the Risk and Assurance Committee, there has been no interference by officers to try to change things for our favour. So that internal auditor, which will be externally sourced, will themselves present to the Risk and Assurance Committee on that report, on their findings of the review of how we procure and are we compliant with a procurement policy.
Thank you.
Rob, did you have another question?
Yes, I just wanted a question of yourself, please. I'm with the recommendation is here for option 1, which is to accept the draft procurement policy.
Rob, can I just stop you there? Because we haven't finished questions of the item in itself. If you want to ask about making a different sort of recommendation, can I ask you to just pause there? Thank you. Glenda, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask? No? Okay. Thank you. Mike, I've got a question.
No, thank you.
No, thanks. Just a thumbs up or down will do. Mike, I've got a question. It seems to me, like I know we've got some very expert procurement staff at council now, and a lot's getting made of how we're going to build our capacity and capability in that space going forward. And you've talked about ensuring that staff are trained and really up for the job. What assurance can you give us that the training will actually be delivered, and those going forward, I'm not so much reflecting on the staff that we've got here at the moment, that as an organisation we will have a really strong capability?
Look, I think in my mind, as I said, since coming on the tenders board as a chair, I've started to understand the complexity within procurements, and procurement's done well, the value it can add to council and with broader outcomes through the community. I know the Chief Executive has provided examples of how it's been done elsewhere to achieve value, and procurement is becoming more and more to the fore of the councils that we have contacted. So I guess given the importance of procurement and the efficiency that and value it can achieve, then it is important to executive leadership team. It is done well. And to do that, you need to be... The way we did stuff 10, 15 years ago has changed the way we've done today. We need to ensure we're up with the current practice. So absolutely will be part of training program. Our current strategic procurement lead took it upon herself to train herself in this some time ago, and the course she has just about finished, I understand, is a very good course, and our aim is to take our staff through that. I'm not sure that gives you assurance, but given the importance of procurement and doing it well, it is important to the leadership team that staff have the skills to do it well.
Okay, I guess I'm asking for assurance that all staff members have development, professional development. You keep track of it, year end, in practical terms, I want some assurance.
So, through you, Madam Chair, I'll jump in here. The intention is that any contract manager role or anybody that is routinely involved in procurement will have their accountabilities for procurement outlined in their job description. They will have professional development plans in place, and our goal is to ensure that all those staff involved routinely in procurement have got industry standard and relevant training in place, and those that are involved in the higher level procurements have got formal qualifications in procurement, such as the certificate in local government procurement. I'm trying to remember the name of the qualification, but it's an NZQA accredited certificate.
Okay, thank you. Right, Rob, you want to
Thank you. Yeah.
tinker with the recommendation?
So just getting back to this costs, you know, Mike, you're saying that there's extra costs in a tenders board. We had Lana and a procurement officer. I presume there is a procurement officer now, and I presume that under whatever system is adopted, there'll be a procurement officer of some description that did the work that Lana did before. Is that right?
Put your mic on, Mike.
Sorry, the new strategic procurement lead starts 2 weeks last Monday. Starts in the role, and we are wanting to lift the role up to look at a higher, to lift it up to lift our procurement up and not be geared to what it was. So I think David mentioned about a second look over a procurement policy, and I think that's one of the first tasks they'll be doing as well, to just see is that fit for purpose, can it be changed, can it be improved. So certainly, as I've mentioned, the conversations we've had with other councils, they're putting a lot of time and effort into procurement, into the procurement departments to sort of get value out of procurement.
So would you say then that the only extra cost of a tenders board is time of the elected members that are in it and the officers that attend?
I would suggest that time through all officers, particularly senior officers, is quite valuable, and I would rather time be spent on value-added work as opposed to stuff that possibly doesn't add value and can be achieved more efficiently. So I think time is a very valuable and sometimes unrated commodity.
So Rob, what I heard from you before was that you wanted to amend the recommendation. Do you want to talk to us about what you're thinking?
Yeah. The recommendation is, the preferred recommendation from the officers is that we accept option 1. I want to signal that if it's your choice to put option 1 first, that I would want to move an option for option 3, which is to retain the tenders board and retain the procurement policy as it exists.
Okay, I am going to put the recommendation that we've got up there, and if it fails, you'll be very welcome to come in behind. All right, so thank you, and thanks for foreshadowing that. I really appreciate it. So the recommendation that I'm putting to you is that the Strategy and Policy Committee adopts the draft procurement policy as scripted in our papers today. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Andrew. Speakers to the motion. Jenny.
Thank you, Chair Kate. I get a strong sense that we've put the cart before the horse, that I'm very much up for change and an improving process, absolutely. But to me, efficient also has to be effective, and at the moment, I'm not sure I can see the effective element of this. I can certainly see the efficient element in this. And as I said earlier, you know, I've had at least 6 years on the tenders board, and a lot of the stuff that we received was not up to standard. It simply was not. And so it has been put to us that all future staff will have these particular criteria. But that is in a perfect world, and that is not currently where we exist. So are we actually going to be able to recruit those people, and are we going to be able to train those people we have? It is really lovely to have a keen staff member who's doing a good course. that's keenness in the course. That doesn't mean that they're actually fully capable at this point of doing that. I think we've moved, I've been uncomfortable with this whole process since last year, or the lack of process since last year, and I think that maybe we've gone about this the wrong way. So I don't think I'm going to be able to support. I do support change, and I do support doing this better and more effectively and efficiently, but I'm not sure we're doing it in the right way. Yes, we do have a report coming to operations and performance later in the week, and that is supposed to contain all of the contracts that have been let, over 200,000 K since October last year. And it actually doesn't include them all, because I know that there's one missing. So how do we, I mean, I know that because I know about that contract, but I wouldn't normally know about all contracts. So how would I know that things are missing? You know, that concerns me. There was discussion throughout this about the methodology. One of the first things that would come to the Tenders Board is methodology. We never ever challenged the methodology. You know, it's like we were there for, I guess, probity. Are we following a proper, clean process? We never gave our preference as to who should get a contract. It was always around, are we following a clean, proper process? And I only challenged inefficiencies or errors in the process. And I'm not saying that there aren't better ways to do it. I would fully accept that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we've got there. So, although I'm not against change and that we could do this better, I don't think we've landed in the right place at the right time. I think maybe a better way to have done this would have been to suggest that the Tenders Board might have done its dash and that we need to look at something else, and then to work through and get staff up to speed and make sure all the ducks were in a row and then remove the Tenders Board. But I think to have just pulled it out without delegation and then to end up here, I think we've gone about it wrongly. And on that basis, thank you for all the work that's been done to get it to here, but I don't think I can support where we're at because I don't think we're quite ready. Thank you.
Who wants to speak next? I think, Andrew, you had your light on.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, look, I have a different view from Councillor Jenny. I think overall the outcome here is that is around overall outcome for council, for the organisation, and for our district is efficiency and cost effectiveness. And like a lot of things, we've got to try something different from time to time, a different approach, a different way of doing things. And so what I do have confidence in is we've got a new chief executive that has got a far greater competency and background in procurement, tenders, contracting, and so with that, I think there has been probably greater emphasis put on this area than there ever has been. From what gave me confidence through the question time was the assurance around probity, was the delegations were felt to me about right, about sufficiency, were sufficient, and also resourcing and capability from within council. At the end of the day, we need to grow capability and increase capacity within council to make sure that at a council organisation, at a management level, we can actually grow the skills within the organisation. And I think there's nothing wrong with starting that now, or improving that. But also overall, I just feel there's the procurement policy in itself, reading through it, it feels to me that it provides a fair, robust and transparent process for procurement. And yes, there could be a few clunky bits, a bit of a clunky road as we start off this journey, there could be. I'd expect that with any kind of change. And so I'm happy to accept that, but also believe that there's enough robustness in here to have a good transition process to with the removal of the tenders board. So I'm really happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Charlotte?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I sit somewhere in between these two. I do see a lot of value in ensuring that there is absolute proficiency across all staff and certainly in management. And as my colleague has just said, it is very important to be building our capability and our capacity in this, certainly in this area. However, I would like to see a certain level of training and qualifications already within the staff before removing the tenders board completely. Yeah, I'm actually on the fence with whether I will support this or not. I definitely support the policy. I think it's great. I think it's robust, and I think it's absolutely heading in the right direction. Yeah, it's just a matter of timing. Thank you.
Michael?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Myself, like my colleague across the room from me, I've been flip-flopping on this throughout this last hour. Wow. I have gone back to basics though, and that is any movement that allows the empowerment of those that are connected to the value creation to make decisions by themselves is a good movement. It always leads to better business outcomes. And therefore, although I appreciate the heavy work that my colleagues have done on this, and I appreciate that I may not have the full understanding, I believe that the procurement officers will have a better judgment than myself, for instance, on a tenders board. So I think I do support that. And thank you for the officers clarifying the costs that are not going to be at least neutral. I think it's a good thing we should ask ourselves every single one of these is it cost neutral? What is the opportunity cost moving forward? And will there be ongoing impacts? My colleague across the room, though, about training, I totally agree. Then what's the training costs? So we haven't thought about that. I don't think this report was totally ready, but I'm able to make a decision on it today. So thank you for that. The broader outcomes, a minimum of 16%. I love the minimum. I look forward to seeing that be 20% as per the all of government procurement, not guidelines, best practices they seem to use up there. I look forward to seeing a Whanganui centric broad outcomes, including mana whenua, buying local, and not impacting the rest of our strategies, i.e. climate change. And I think I'm happy to raise the Chief Executive's delegation to 300K. However, I'd like some more analysis done on that, as in like, what do you actually need? Is it 500K, 700K, 900K? I don't want to just hear the inflation. I want to see actually there's so many of these going ahead, and the bulk are in this area, and the risk factor is this. And I think 374K and 27 cents makes the perfect number for me. But I'm assuming the Chief Executive's actually gone that looks about right. But I would have liked more analysis. So in fairness, I think I support this motion, and thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Rob?
Thank you. The saying, if it ain't broke, don't try and fix it, comes to my mind here. What this is about is the removal of the input of elected members into the process. And I think that should be really realised around this council table. And what is the value of having an elected member input into this process? Now, the talk about, as was raised about training and talk about the officers are the right people, of course they are. They are well trained in this. All the reports that are prepared, I don't think, very rarely of the hundreds of reports that Jenny and I would have read, would there be something that we would say we disagreed with. But there are occasions when an elected member input is very important. Mike and I often disagreed about what the role of the elected member was on the tenders board. But as I pointed out, that one of the terms of reference, and I considered the most important, was that we were there to ensure the value for the ratepayer. And that's what I think that the elected member puts into that process. And I want to talk about one occasion to give you an idea about value for the ratepayer. If you go back to the Wikitoria Road culvert, when the officer's recommendation was that the job was going to cost $700,000, and the residents there got together and got in a local contractor, priced up the job, and they said, well, it's not going to be over $400,000. Now, that went out for tender. And guess what? The tender came in at $440,000. And it wasn't from the person that the residents had got to get a price from. It was one of the three companies that put in the tender. What actually happened was then the scope of the job was widened to use up the $700,000. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. But as an elected member, at least I had a say in that particular contract of trying to stop that happening. You know, and there are 2 or 3 other occasions over the years that I was on the tenders board where similar things happen. I think that removing the input of elected members into that process is a bad move for this council, and it's a bad move for this community. And I hope this doesn't get approved. If it's not approved, I will move a resolution to continue with the current process with the modifications that the Chief Executive would like to add, but the elected member must stay in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Philippa?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree. The elected member. I mean, I don't see the elected member ever being out of this, out of this decision making, and that at the end of the day, we sit at the table. We're certainly going to be seeing tenders over 3.5 million. We're certainly going to hear from our community if there's concerns, and I mean, I support my colleague in that. And look, it's very seldom I would, disagree or vote against, I guess, where I'm seeing, for example, Councillor Vincent. But I'm looking to support this motion. While I think the tenders boards generally, generally served Whanganui, us in Whanganui adequately. In my time, I found it, to be kind of quite a hidden process. I've certainly never been on it, and yet it's such an important. It is very important. These are our tenders for contracts, no matter how big or small. So I've found it to be quite hidden. I believe the robustness and independence and the skill set is really important, and that's what I'm hearing about. The position of a strategic procurement lead, only using an independent probity auditor as required, and I think these things are really important. And I'll elaborate later, I guess, in maybe in the annual plan discussion. But there's been one significant tender that's had a significant effect on actually, our annual plan this year. That's been over a decade long, and it has not been a robust process. And this has been council led every step of the way. So I'm allowed. That is absolutely fair go. I don't want to see the overuse of contractors, for example, an independent probity auditor, but I hear that we're not going to have that. I really support the Chief Executive and his leadership and his strategic competence, especially in this area. You know, he's got significant experience around procurement in his past roles. So, yes, you know, the buy local premium, you know, this whole thing about broader outcomes, and I would hope that the buy local premium and with broader outcomes will become more important. You know, I guess in the end, I think it is broken. I think we do need to fix it, and so I'm going to put my support into this change and look forward to seeing improved processes forward, so that we don't end up in a position that we're finding ourselves in at the moment, particularly with some big contracts that have had significant cost increases or blowouts. Thank you.
Thanks, Philippa. Peter?
Yeah, generally I support this, but my concerns is about the weighting of the broader outcomes. I'd like to see it increase to at least 20%. And I would also, if you read the four broader outcomes, they all need to be ensured that the Maori lens goes through that. It is, you know, I would like somehow for that to be embedded in it. And one of the must be the positive benefits to residents, and the living wage as a minimum is in one of them. And I noticed that in the recycling tender the other day, that some of the workers there that they are using will be on the minimum wage, and that was the runners on it. So it's just, that's why it's important that the weighting increases. That's why it's...
Thank you. Glenda?
Thank you. Look, because something's been done for many years and very well, I don't think it means it shouldn't be reviewed and changed. Reviewing and streamlining processes is a great thing and something we should always be doing. I do believe that there are really good layers of accountability in this new process that's been brought to us today, especially bringing tenders through the committees for approval. I would just like to note, though, that I do agree with Councillor Duncan with the fact that this work should have been done with the existing tender board still continuing. However, I will absolutely support this motion. I think it's a great idea, and I look forward to the streamlining processes. Thanks.
Thanks, Glenda. Just a final comment from myself, seeing as everybody looks like they're finished. Procurement, I am in no doubt that procurement is getting increasingly complex, and therefore we need to have a system that will deal with that complexity. I absolutely accept that the tender process needs to be free from bias and free from the perception of bias. I place quite a lot of weight on the fact that there are no other known examples around other councils where there is a tenders board that have elected members on it. So that suggests to me that we're behind the eight ball and that we actually need to move forward and get more professional about what we're doing. And it's not so much that I don't think that elected members can be professional in a role like that, it's more about the perception of bias. I take on board the comments that that it's been a bit of a clunky start in terms of doing things differently, but I think we need to give this a try. You can be assured that as the Deputy Chair of Risk and Assurance, that the spotlight will be on the piece of work around internal audit in terms of the procurement process. And I would expect that to be to Risk and Assurance and reporting through to the Council in pretty smart time. So yeah, that said, I recommend this this motion to you. All those in favour, please say aye. I might need a hand raising, please. Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you. All right, we're moving on to item 5.2, future-proofing Whanganui District Council's older person housing portfolio. Welcome, Lauren.
Morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present this report, the Future Proofing Council's Older Persons Housing Portfolio. Our housing strategy in 2019 identified 4 key outcomes. This report fits really well into the outcome 2, which is Whanganui's homes are good quality and future-proofed. The report has identified that our current housing stock condition is diminishing, but the need isn't. We have 275 units within the 16 complexes. 4 are currently not in use due to land instability issues, and we have had a constant wait list for around the last 4 years. This report was commissioned to review the current stock and provide advice on future demand and how we can future-proof. It's comprehensive. It's a comprehensive report that identifies that a substantial, staged and strategic approach is needed over the long-term plan processes. So I take the report as read, and if there are any questions.
Thanks, Lauren. Certainly a very fulsome report, I thought. Do my colleagues have any questions of the report? Actually, I'll kick off with one. So the recommendation before us today is that we receive the report in the understanding that this report will form part of our long-term plan.
Yes.
So would you like to talk to us a little bit about how that will happen? You know, what are the practical next steps?
So the practical next steps is we will sit down and work with the property team and develop this into the into what would be a recommended staged approach, and then into the point of entry business case process.
Okay, cool. Rob?
Yeah, Lauren, I just can't find the report here. Are you aware where it's filed on our system?
It's in Diligent, and it was part of the references.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions? We can come back to you,
Yeah.
Rob.
Okay.
Julian?
Yeah. How would the council ensure that housing for the vulnerable residents of varying socio-economic backgrounds and life stages is prioritised in the extension plans?
I guess that will be part of what we look at. Our social housing is, this is for older persons housing, and that need is going to grow in our community, and certainly that's going to be key to what we're looking at as far as I guess, prioritising.
Kia ora. Who administrates the Kaumātua flats?
So the Kaumātua flats are all administrated by different trusts.
Does council have any input into the administration of those flats?
No.
Would council look at support for the easy transport access that most flats and council pensioner flats are able to access? I'm speaking specifically of Pūtiki Kaumātua flats where there's no access to town other than walking or private car. Would council look at any support or maybe leaning towards bus services to that area?
So one of the things that we've done, particularly under the Positive Ageing Forum and under the Age Friendly plan, has been working with Horizons around relooking, and the forum often provide feedback to the to horizons around their bus routes, and I know that they are constantly looking at bus routes. So that's certainly something that we can put forward.
Even possibly not so much a bus as minivans, just to support those. It wouldn't be possibly a financial gain, but it'd be a huge social gain. Kia ora, thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Philippa, then Glenda.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. It's a great report. I thought it was an excellent report. But I'm just a bit concerned, or just want clarity. So I see the recommendation. I guess, my expectation coming to the table was that actually it is a significant report, significant area that we would actually have the presenter perhaps go through it with us, or perhaps Lauren, and look at those key findings. But can you explain what the thinking is? I see right at the end, page 11 of 111, for example, of the report, and 12 has some the key kind of recommendations, probably about 15 of them in yellow, and it notes that in the end it should be considered by the Whanganui District Council. So when are we looking to properly consider this report if it's not today? And I heard something about the long-term plan. So if we could just get clarity there.
So I asked Lauren what was the next steps, within the large umbrella of what is our long-term plan. Would you like to repeat your response to that, please, Lauren?
I guess because of the amount of information in here and the amount of work that could be done across all of those recommendations, the idea was to put this forward into the long-term plan discussions rather than have it at this meeting.
So with that, would we be, looking to have I don't know, are we this in itself, probably needs half day or something to really go through it, possibly have the consultant as well, answer questions. Is that how I just hate to see this as being, we've got an hour to discuss this. There's some quite key stuff, there's some quite key changes recommended. I mean, my first reading of it is excellent. It gives us a way forward of, I won't go into it, but it's a good way forward to work with other partners, to find some other money, to obviously it talks about a significant amount of, increasing that housing stock, but how we might go about that by, possibly building some new, and then you can put people, to move people while you get rid of some. So there's all that kind of stuff, and maybe it's a chief executive, but just would like some real clarity about when we might consider this and how we'd do that.
Through you, Madam Chair. Look, you're right. The purpose of today is to receive the report only. There is going to be a lot of work required to actually digest it, understand it, and come to some kind of decision on what parts of the report or the report in its entirety that you actually choose to implement. The process for doing that will be likely through a combination of workshops with elected members to help you understand what's in the report, and then the preparation of business cases that can go into our project prioritisation process for the long-term plan, so that you can choose which parts of the report you do or don't fund. I would just comment, we had originally intended to have the report author come and speak, but unfortunately, since completing the report, they have passed away, so they're no longer available. Otherwise, they would have been invited to present to you.
And just to say, sorry, I didn't realise that, so my apology.
It's all right, you didn't know. Philippa.
Yeah, thank you. Just one last question. There would just be, I think it's, also, what's the word, getting this out, wider with our partners and the public. I think, it'll be, obviously the long-term plan process, we'd eventually get stuff out to our partners and to the public. There's some discussion around the long-term plan, how we go about some of those workshops, possibly, not, some of them in public, but I guess I'd just like to put it in management's, that they consider how we bring in public feedback, probably earlier in the process rather than later. But yeah, that's my questions answered. Thank you.
So I guess just to follow on from that, if we take a long time to do this, it'll be 2050 when we start actually doing any work. How do, and this is one of the interesting things that, if we think back to the Council Mark report that we had about prioritisation, how a lot of our strategies were lacking prioritisation. How do, and I'd be quite interested to hear from you, Lauren or Dave, how do you prioritise a big piece of work like this? You get, I know the step one is getting enough resource in the housing space at council so that actually these things can come forward to a committee as a first step, but what happens next? What's next? I know in broad terms, but in time frames I'm looking for.
So, if you don't mind, Lauren, through you, Madam Chair. Yeah. So this is incredibly complicated, not just because of the individual issue at hand, but also how housing sits in amongst all of the other services that council delivers and where its overall priority sets. So that is one of the recommendations from Council Mark, is to put some kind of prioritisation framework in place to help bring some order to that and some structure. We've already made good inroads into putting that into place. The next step is to start actually taking the recommendations and translating that into a scope of work, so that you know with some clarity what is it that you actually want to do, so that it can be suitably costed out, a business case prepared, and then you can give it proper funding consideration in the long-term plan. The purpose there is to smooth the way so that once you have funding in place, you can then move quickly into the execution phase, because the scope is clearly defined. We know what it is we're expected to deliver, and we've got a reliable budget in place to enable that to happen. One of the places we've often come unstuck in the past is we haven't done that piece of work before setting the budget. So there's been figures put into the LTP to try and enable it, but then there's a lot of wasted effort, or misplaced effort I should say, where we have to go back and cover old ground to try and redefine actually what is the scope of this general housing budget, for example, that we put in the LTP. So we need to have greater degree of upfront planning that then allows us to execute rapidly and reliably.
So would it be unreasonable of me to expect then that we would have some certainty about what we're doing with this piece of work by next June?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's certainly the intention. Is we will, officers in conjunction with elected members, will dissect and digest this report and start translating it into business cases, so that you've got discrete projects that you can actually say, yes, we want to invest in that, it's going to deliver the strategic outcomes we want, and then you can put well considered budgets into the LTP ready for 1 July 2024.
Okay, sounds good. And that will go through Rob's committee, the working up those business cases, right?
Through Madam Chair, yes, that's right, and we do already have one business case that's been drafted, and we expect it to go on to the next committee meeting's agenda, that was proposed by Councillor Vincent, that does relate very well to the contents of this report.
Okay, thank you. Love the answers. Glenda, you've
Thank you. Thank you. I think mine probably follows on from this latest conversation on planning and workshops. I just note at Remu Street there's black mould, which I'm horrified to read that. So I'm wondering, I mean, I know we have to workshop, we have to plan, we have to do a scope of the works, but I'd like to see, if possible, that could be remedied like ASAP, because that's a health and safety issue. I suppose this is the question for you, David.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, absolutely. You know, dealing with those kind of matters is something we already have maintenance, facility management and maintenance budgets for. It's not something that needs to sit and wait until the LTP and budgets in 2024. Our operations team will definitely be onto those kind of issues much more promptly.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Rob?
Thank you. Yes, first of all, I think this is an excellent report, and it carries a lot of detail about the condition of these complexes, which is very helpful to understand. It's specifically commissioned as an older person's report relating to our complexes. Was there any consideration to widening this to the housing situation in general? I mean, the previous report, the 2016 one, identified more need in the community and emergency housing and those sorts of things. Was there consideration to look at that situation and compare that to the need for investment in older persons' housing?
No, not. So this was specifically just to address older persons, I guess, because that's where council's direction has been around these units. And we know that the need is across all housing. That hasn't changed. But this was, and we also know that our projected older population is going to grow. And so what we currently have is not going to be anywhere near close enough to fitting just the older population in the next 30 years.
So of the 24 odd complexes, there's a couple of them there that have got pretty dodgy, dodgy's not the right word, but not complementary condition reports. Could you just identify those, Lauren, and give us some comment about them?
Well, has that not just been answered in relation to the black mould question?
No.
It's in the report.
There's some recommendations there about it's not advisable to actually spend any more money on them.
So I guess, as David has said, there's a program of work that's already set in place for the property team that manages the portfolio. So they've already got a process in place for that. Some of this is the things that will urgently need to be done, but some of the greater pieces of work need to really, that's part of that sitting down and prioritising. Do we spend more, or do we, how do we bring this, like, what is the priority? Do we spend more now and do some more to fix this up and lift the standard, or do we stop and go, actually, if we don't do that, there are 3 other things that we could do? So I think that even if we drill down right now into which properties are worse than others, we still need to make sure that we prioritise that against the whole picture of how that works, because whatever we do, it's going to be a step process. If we decide that we're going to redo this whole process, we have to have something in place for those people. So I guess we need to line our ducks up so that we're doing it right, so that we don't end up removing some people out of a home that then have nowhere else to go because we have nothing else in place. So there's a lot in here that needs to just be, I guess, step managed so that we can make sure that it's all in the correct process, so that it flows well for everybody, the tenants, the community, and council and budgets.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to put the recommendation now that the Strategy and Policy Committee receive the report, Future Proofing Whanganui District Council's Older Persons Housing Portfolio. Would you like to move that, Jenny? Yes? Yeah. Have I got a seconder? Thank you, Charlotte. Any discussion? Philippa?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm really pleased to see this report. I like it mentioned. Yeah, it's very sad to hear the report writer has passed away, but what, you know, excellent person, and now that I understand who it was, and what an excellent report to leave us with in such a key area for our community. I guess great to, for the responses we've got from Lauren and from our Chief Executive, kind of understand how we need to consider this in the LTP going forward, and know that we will consider this well. I guess my, what I'd like, you know, I think what's really important as we go through whatever this is called, the LTP prioritisation work, that we do move on this quite early. We've got 4 months to get in front of political parties and tell them about the really key work, the things that need to be done. They might be saying the chest is empty, but we need to get ourselves in that batting order, and I think this area is one of them. You know, that's you know, I mean, housing is important. We're reading in this how much our older persons population is going to increase in the next 25 years. We're hearing how much, you know, we're roughly, as it might, sorry, I've looked at the report at the moment, but we're nearly 200 houses, you know, we could do with another 200 pensioner housing properties to look after our most vulnerable older people. So, yeah, my kororo would be, let's get in front of it. Let's do this work as well but quickly as we can. Not wait to, you know, to June next year. We've got 4 months to get in front of those parties, and to try and get their attention and get some promises that we can move forward post-election. Thank you.
Thanks,
help us in this area.
Charlotte, Rob and Andrew.
Thank you. This is a fantastic report, incredibly detailed into the current state of our housing stock. It's fantastic that we can move and accept this report so our staff can get on with the job that is obviously needed to replenish and revive the stock that we already have and grow it for our growing older population. So thank you very much for bringing this report to us.
Rob?
Thank you. Yes, I just echo that this is a very good report. And I just want to say, though, that I raised this issue about older persons housing. Experience I had recently, I advertised a rental property and I had 47 applicants. Only one couple would have been eligible to go into council's older persons housing. The other 45, I would consider them more into the emergency housing category. And this report doesn't mention anything about emergency housing or social housing. And as Lauren said, it wasn't commissioned to do that. But I'll just draw council's attention to the previous 2016 report, which did cover that and identified the real need in Whanganui for more beds for emergency housing. And so I commend this report, and certainly there's some helpful things in here to go forward with. But council has to get more beds available. Whatever the category, has to get more beds available. And some of the recommendations in here about renovation and those sorts of things are not going to get any more beds available. So whatever policies we get going forward, we've got to try and get more housing available. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Andrew?
Yeah, look, it seems to be the common theme is the report is very well done. So, and thank you for presenting that too, Lauren. So, yeah, last week I went out and done volunteer week last week and went to Meals on Wheels and went around a number of houses around our community, and including some of our council housing stock as well. And Yeah, it was. Look, it was just anecdotally and just from the visible, visibly seeing these our housing stock. It was pretty sobering actually, so this speaks to that. And there's also a sense of with our older persons. There's obviously an increasing number, but also, you know, it looks like for a lot of these people it's really hard being old, and they were lonely. They were shut in their houses. You're not old yet, Rob. But it was actually really sad. I walked away that day feeling like I've done a little bit for the community, but I actually felt really sad as well. This wasn't just in the council flats. These were in other parts of our community as well. And so this is a wider issue than just housing. It's a social issue as to how we, as a council, respond to all members of our community, including those who are old and lonely. This just happens to be a report about housing, and last year I visited Papoya Place, I think it's called. It's in Palmerston North. It's a model of housing which I thought was fantastic. What it did is created a space where people felt they were part of a community. They felt they had a sense of belonging, and they felt valued. And when I went out to our community, I felt quite the opposite, and came back quite, I was quite shaken up actually, thinking I was excited about volunteering and helping out and doing my little bit, but I walked away feeling pretty shaken up. And at the end of the day, as I've said, we are here to serve our community, for all our community, not just a select few. I'm not saying that we do that, but it's when we think about, and as I've said many times before, we can only be measured how we treat our most vulnerable in our community, and that applies to some of these people as well that are in these flats in the middle of winter, who don't venture outside. This was a nice sunny day, and I said to a couple of people, have you been outside today to enjoy the sunshine? And they hadn't been, and they're sitting there by themselves. So I'm giving you a bit of a sob story here, but this is reality. This is how people live. So I think this report is absolutely necessary to point the way forward as to how we respond to this community. We live in a very constrained environment financially, and so how we do this is going to be difficult, and from a financial perspective. So constrained is one word. The other one is complex. Housing and social needs are complex, and how we deal with housing in general is something we've been talking about and working towards. The other one is therefore collaboration and partnership. How do we collaborate with other housing providers and others in the community to increase our housing stock, but also to increase the sense of community and helping these people feel valued and respected. So I fully support this, and obviously it's just my little commentary about what I've observed, and I just had my eyes opened again last week, so it's very timely to see this report, and so thank you for that.
Thank you. Big thank you to you, Lauren, for squiring this report from inception through to the committee. It is what I would describe as, like, if we want to make a difference in terms of housing outcomes in Whanganui, we and council is working in various parts of the continuum. We need to do it in bite-sized chunks, and this is a really nice bite-sized chunk that sequences, well, it names the issue and then sequences some solutions. So I think it's been well acknowledged what a good piece of work this is. So thank you to you and your team, and really look forward to it forming part of our planning going into the future in good time. All right, we'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. See, those unanimous recommendations, they're good. All right, government consultation update. Thank you, Elise. And I think we're getting Catherine too. Welcome.
Kia ora, thank you. We do have a late item to table just before we start. So that is titled Water Services Entities Amendment Bill, Draft Submission for Comment. And that has been circulated to elected members as well. Diane, do I need to bring a hard copy up for tabling? Or
Well, what do we think? Let's address this issue. So what do we think? What are you wanting out of this meeting in relation to the submission, Elise?
So there is an opportunity for comment today. If elected members wish to provide comment, then that would be welcome. However, this is also to, the submission is due on 5th of July, so there will be further time for comment, refinement, feedback. By tabling it, we are then putting it into the public arena. So that would be the purpose in tabling it now. Sure. All of our submissions are always tabled in the public arena after we submit them. Because we have a bit more time than we expected, we are able to do this step if you so wish.
Fantastic. So probably the way that this will roll is you'll table it, you'll talk to it, hopefully, and then I'm sure a couple of comments may get made now, but given that the committee members haven't read the latest submission, I think there'll probably be feedback afterwards. But it shouldn't preclude you from making comments now. I just don't want to take up too much time.
Okay, that sounds good. We will talk briefly to the submission then, if that's been tabled, and I'll start with the high-level overview first, and also just to introduce Catherine Stewart, who's Program Manager here at Council to support Three Waters transition work. So kia ora tātou. As you know, I'm Elise, the Policy Manager at Council, and I'm here to present the Government Consultation update for June. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update on various consultations underway or those which are planned by central government or other organisations which have the potential to impact on Council or the wider community. Also of particular interest is a report back on the central government's Three Waters policy reset and a draft submission which we've just tabled for consideration today. I just want to look back briefly before we look forward. So just looking back in terms of what's happened, the Select Committee has now reported back on two previous bills related to the Three Waters reform, the Water Services Legislation Bill and the Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill. Gosh, they are mouthfuls, and they received a significant amount of feedback on those bills and made many changes to those, and we're really pleased to note some of the positive changes that have been made, in particular to the Water Services Legislation Bill following the Select Committee process. And a number of these changes are things that local government has been advocating for, and in particular Whanganui Council has advocated for some of these points, including the changes that land transferred to their water entities will be rateable, and the water service entities will be liable to pay those rates. The transitional collection of charges by councils, which was out to 2019, which was quite a long transitional time, has been brought back to 30 June 2027, so that's a positive. The water infrastructure contributions provisions appear to have been largely rewritten and now require kāinga order to pay water infrastructure contributions. And the new entities are required to create a development code to respond to planning processes and growth. It must be drafted consistently with a set of principles which include that the entities support, enable and are responsive to planning processes and growth for additional housing and urban development. So again, these are just a few of the changes to the previous bills, but there have been a wide range of changes made. Those are now closed. So in terms of looking forward, as you're well aware, the government has announced a reset of the Three Waters program and has introduced an amendment bill called the Water Services Entities Amendment Bill. and that is giving effect to the recent policy changes. Now, the bill was introduced for its first reading last week and has already gone to Select Committee. Submissions are open until 5th of July next week. So it is a very short time frame for response, but it is a little longer than we expected. So that is also positive in this context. So officers have drafted a submission for your feedback and comment, which has been tabled, and you will also find you have it in your emails. Some important changes that we want to draw your attention to, which have been introduced through the bill. The bill now establishes 10 water entities based on the existing regional boundaries instead of the original 4. Whanganui will now be part of a Manawatu Whanganui entity following the existing regional boundaries and with our neighbouring authorities. Palmerston North, Rangatike, Ruapehu, Manawatu, Horowhenua and Tararua. There is now a staggered approach to the entities going live or standing up, with all entities going live between the 1st of July next year and the 1st of July 2026, rather than the earlier date of everyone going live 1st of July next year. What this means is that the Manawatu Whanganui entity will stand up at some point, likely between 1st of July 2025 and 1st of July 2026, we believe. But the Northland and Auckland Water Services entity is set in legislation to go live on 1st of July next year. And officers do view the changes to the legislation that have been made as broadly positive for Whanganui in terms of providing greater representation of our local voice. In particular, each local territorial authority is now represented on the regional representative group. Bit of a mouthful, but each council now has a seat at the table. Catherine, do you want to say anything further about the submission in front of you? I wasn't going to deep dive too much into that. There's quite a lot of, we've put the opening piece as the key changes which we view as being positive and pragmatic. One of the ones I didn't mention was the inclusion of community priority statements. So this is an addition that bolsters the importance of local voice and aspirations, and it's something that we've advocated for throughout the reform process. And they've also clarified transitional arrangements for local governments such as long-term plans, rating years, and infrastructure asset management planning. And this is really helpful for council staff because obviously we're going into our long-term plan and it's helpful to have that clarity around what is required. Then we go into a range of suggested amendments that we would like to make, put forward to the bill itself. And then in the second half of the submission, you'll see that we're actually making related matters, that we're not advocating directly to the legislative process or select committee on these changes. These are more broad changes that we'd like to advocate for on behalf of community and staff, and will likely be advocating to the Department of Internal Affairs. So just to keep in mind, a number of these things the select committee itself will not be able to change or influence, but this is about singling what is important to Whanganui and the community and putting that down on paper here at this opportunity. But keep in mind, the committee will have a very short time frame for making legislative changes, and we're trying to keep this submission incredibly focused. I initially said 2 pages. I think it's now spanned over 3, but we are hoping to keep it short and sharp and on point. Is there anything you want to add, Catherine?
I think you've covered all of it. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, would you like to break there for that item and receive any comment?
Yeah, we can. Questions, comments?
Thank you.
Rob.
Can you tell me, Elise, what a dispersed organisational model is, where you say we wish to see the adoption of a dispersed organisational model?
So that is very much about ensuring that the entity's organisational structure doesn't consolidate all of the offices or staff or depots in one place. And there's an element to which that's impossible. You know, at the end of the day, the wastewater treatment plant still has to be operated by people at the wastewater treatment plant. So there are facilities like that that innately have to have people based in those physical places. But then there are other functions which you could argue that you could centralise in a particular part of the district. All of your admin support services for the entity, or all of your asset management, or all of your technical managerial skills. And so we would push back against that and encourage sort of a more dispersed model of working, because it's technically possible and physically possible, and it means that you retain highly skilled jobs in local communities far more.
Well, I totally agree with what you just said, but I wonder, by saying in the submission, whether just saying we wish to see the adoption of a dispersed organisational model gets that message across. You know, I mean, what you've just explained certainly gets it across to me, but I don't know that would mean anything of any great depth by just saying that.
Yep. We can sense check that and kind of tweak the labelling that we put around that.
Mm.
Yep.
Helen?
Thank you. So I'm just reading it now, the letter response. I guess my biggest question is, I think this council is still not happy with the government proposed taking away our local control of Three Waters. So we don't mention that at all in this submission. We're basically responding to what the government has proposed a second time.
Yeah.
I guess that's for me missing. Like it's still that protest vote to say we still do not overall agree with taking the local out of our control, and then the rest, of course, you've got to do because we have to massage what they're proposing. Yeah.
Make the best of a bad job is what I think
Yeah,
you're saying.
but we need to put in something there to still our protest. Yeah, thank you.
The fundamental.
Thank you.
Can I go on that? Because Councillor Helen raises the same sort of point as what we are concerned about. We are concerned about cross-subsidisation. I think we're all concerned about that. I see Palmerston North is mentioned in here. I don't see the word cross-subsidisation in the submission, and I think it's a very important one. Government have talked about it and recognised it. So I would like to see some strengthening in the submission about our concern about that.
Yes, I was going to say we may be able to find a form of words to introduce it in as a more general point. But the issue of cross-subsidisation was considered as part of Bill 2, and the committee has already made changes in Bill 2 in relation to that. So it's very much outside the scope of this bill and what the committee can do. But as I say, I think there's probably a form of words somewhere in there to address the point in some way.
Ross?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Look, I haven't thought what I'm about to say through very deeply, but when you create another layer of government, you create staff, you need expert staff. They've got to come from somewhere, often within your own country. My concern would be that, I don't know how it can be measured, whether it's relevant, but my concern is that we could lose specialist staff in certain areas that we currently have because they're offered a remuneration at an entity level that is too tempting to reject. And then if we lose some of those key staff, where are we going to replace them from? Because we already have pressures in local government. We also have competition within local government for particular roles, and we have salary caps. So I'm just putting that thought there that the creation of an entity may put unfair burdens on some local councils to cope with this.
I'm possibly going to ask David to finish any answer if I miss anything, but I think in some regards that's perhaps an unanswerable question at this stage and outside of our powers. On the other hand, I can reassure you that it is on the program risk register for the impact of Three Waters and what that means for the organisation. And as I say, we don't have all the answers yet, but the kind of overall how do we manage that risk in the medium and longer term is sort of front and centre. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, David.
Not a lot other than to say, through you, Madam Chair, look, that's always been a threat posed by these reforms. The original case for change indicated that the Three Waters sector would need circa 9,000 additional staff members over the next 30 years in order to deliver many billions of dollars of additional investment. That's not just engineering staff, but resource consent planners, all of those technical staff are going to be in high demand as well, and local government is going to be the obvious and first training ground for these new entities to come and recruit from. Always been a threat, and it's going to be something that we're going to have to really manage our way through, because I don't think we've got any credible mitigations available to us at the moment.
Right, Peter?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My concern also reflects the last two speakers. The introduction of this is going to be staggered. So if you're the last cab on the rack, your talent pool is going to be seriously depleted. So my submission would be that it's not staggered, but just completely delayed, so that we have equal opportunity to hire this talent or retain them.
I think the chances of successfully advocating for a different single date through the select committee process are probably slim to none. And I think that the bill is structured in a way where it very deliberately does not allocate dates to entities. The Minister has been very clear that he expects that to be a process that local authorities have far more say in. And I think we are about to enter a delicate dance with our neighbours and the DIA as we come to a decision on that, or allow others to make the decision depending on our preference. But it is certainly why we, as I say, it's not in the committee's gift, but in the submission, sort of drawing a line in the sand that we think we could be ready to go in the first financial year for all of those reasons, the financial impact, the staff flight risk impact, and then also having the kind of pick of the bunch of board appointments and other staff appointments. So sort of balancing those two risks. And I think we'll sort of come back to future committees and to council again before any kind of final, or to provide an update on that dance, shall we say.
Very good. I think we'll draw this part of our discussion to a close. When would you like committee members' feedback on the submission by?
Yes, thank you. So please take time to read it and get any comments by the end of this week, please. And then we will refine the submission further, taking on board what we've heard today and anything we receive in written form. And then we recirculate it as final, and the final submission also is reported back to the next strategy and policy meeting. And as Catherine said, you know, there is a lot more work to go with the broader program. So this is really trying to keep it very focused in this submission on the legislation, keeping in mind the remit of the committee to consider what they've got to consider. We'll continue that advocacy more broadly, though.
Fantastic. So, did you want to comment on any of the other submissions
yes.
that are about?
Yep, that would be great. Thank you, Madam Chair. There's just one more open submission at the moment on the Whanganui Freshwater Management Unit Survey. So this has been run by Horizons Regional Council. So this work comes through the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, which directs regional councils to identify areas called freshwater management units. And this freshwater management unit can be a water body, including rivers, lakes, streams, aquifers and wetlands, or any part of a water body determined to be the appropriate scale for managing fresh water. And in the Horizons region, they're based around river catchments. So the Whanganui catchment is an FMU, and Horizons is now consulting on a draft vision for the area, and that vision will be then used to go into their one plan. So we're recommending that the council respond to this, and if you agree, then officers will draft a response and circulate that around for comment as per the usual process. The survey is open until 9 July. So there is further information in the report, but in terms of looking forward, it would be good to get a steer if that is something that you are supportive of us moving forward with.
Well, I was certainly very supportive of what I've seen outlined on, I think it's page 70 and 71.
Yep.
Any other comment? We're very definitely heading in the right direction. No? Okay, folks, I'm going to put the recommendation that we receive the report. We're going to assume that you're all good with the submission to the Horizons survey and move forward along that line. I'll put the recommendation that the Strategy and Policy Committee receive the report, Government Consultation Update for June 2023. Thank you very much. We've got a seconder. Thank you, Josh. Josh is still awake. This is good. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Right. Whistle-stop tour of the Strategy and Policy Work Programme. Any questions? Or do you want to speak to it, Lance? Did you have a 5-minute speech ready for it? Yeah, yep. Ditto. Yep, thank you.
So obviously the purpose of the report is just to give you the work program for this committee. It is a living document, so it'll move and shift as it needs to. You may notice there is a couple of gaps there around the property and infrastructure teams. So we are working with officers on anything relevant going into this program from those groups, recognising though that those groups are more in the operations space than the strategy space, so not to expect too much in there. And then purely from an admin point of view, and she's gone now, Councillor Jenny mentioned at the O&P Chair's brief, we will, in future, you'll see the dates across the top of page 2 as well, so it won't be quite as difficult to see where the ticks relate to in terms of time frames. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. No questions? All right.
One, I think. I might be missing it. Sorry, I think it was in the last, but I can't see the open spaces and physical activity strategy. Am I missing it? I thought that was due to report in about July.
I think the public places bylaw. Is that what you're referring to? Public places bylaw. It's on the top of page 74.
Well, it's the open spaces and physical activity strategy, which I'm clear because the Sport and Recreation Advisory Groups looked at that it is due to report. It was due to report in July, I believe, for an action plan, and I don't think it's on this now.
Okay, thanks, Elise.
Philippa is correct. It was on there and then we moved it off as we were uncertain of which committee it should go to, but the process is right. It will go to Sport and Advisory Group. I believe you have a meeting this week, and then it will go up to a committee, depending on which committee is correct to go to. So,
as a strategy question,
it's not a strategy. It is not a strategy. The strategy is done and was accepted and adopted last year. This is an action plan on how we are implementing the strategy.
Right.
So
how we are to implement the strategy or implementing?
We are already starting with the implementation, so there's already activity underway as well as plans to implement it. So it does potentially straddle both committees. I just wanted to ensure that it was going to the right committee before it was on a work plan, but it will be coming up to a committee, and it
Right.
will be going through the sport advisory group this week.
Ka pai.
Thank you.
All right, no further questions. We'll put the recommendation that the committee receive the report, the committee work program 2023. Thank you very much, Lance. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Charlotte. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attendance and participation. Julian, I'm going to ask you to offer a karakia to close our meeting. Thank you.
Certainly. Karakia whakamutunga o tēnei hui. E oha ki runga ki a Ranganui, e oha ki raro ki a Papatūānuku, wakatairanga te kupu, te kōrero, te mahi, ki te pau o te ware, he taonga, he mahi a muri, ka puta ki te waiao, ki te ao marama, hui e, taiki. I acknowledge and greet those things above, the sky, universe and the heavens. I acknowledge and greet those things below, the earth in its entirety. Let's suspend the words of discussion, debate, negotiations. The work covered to the pillar of the house as a treasure point of importance to be revisited at a later time so we may enter into an enlightenment. Let it be bound and fixed. Yes, fixed. Let it be agreed by all. Kia ora tātou.
Amen. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.